Iris was born and raised in a wealthy family. Her dad was the owner of a chain of restaurants, and her mom was the owner of the best bridal salon in the city. From early childhood, the girl had everything that a child her age could wish for, but she was never spoiled. Iris was an excellent student at school, a great painter, and she knew several foreign languages. As the only child in the family, the girl was the pride of her parents, and high hopes were pinned on her future. Iris studied architecture in college and dreamed of a successful career. She ignored any signs of attention from men, as she didn't have time for a relationship. She spent it all on her studies. But the young woman's father had a different opinion on this matter. "Iris, dear, we need to have a serious talk." The man began the conversation. "Your mother and I aren't young anymore, and we would really like to get to see our grandchildren. I know that you don't feel like it's a priority, but it's time for you to think about starting a family." "What family, Dad?" the young woman exclaimed. "I want to study, get an internship, get a job like everyone else. What's the rush?" "Who's stopping you? Study, get a job, but also get married. I even have a worthy contender for you, the son of my business partner. You two could even become our successors." Iris understood that her father had already planned out her future because all he thought about was the financial benefits such a relationship could bring him. All the young woman's attempts to get through to her father's heart turned out to be pointless. And just the next weekend, Dustin was already standing at the door of their house with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. The man was handsome, tall, but shy and clumsy, like a bear. Iris was indignant. What century did they think they were in that her parents decided to find her a husband, disregarding her opinion? The woman was openly miserable because she didn't love Dustin, even after several months of dating. Yes, sure, he was a good man, but her heart didn't care. Iris had already resigned herself to the idea that her wedding was inevitable because she saw how firm her parents were in their decision. Her father had already set the date of the celebration and called all their relatives, and her mother took it upon herself to make the best wedding dress for her daughter. "What can I do? I guess I'll have to go through with it for the sake of my family," the woman thought, getting ready for the bachelorette party, which her friends were throwing for her 2 weeks before the wedding. The party took place far outside the city in a hotel by the lake. Having had her fun for the last time before the start of her married life, Iris decided not to spend the night at the hotel, but take her car home right away because she promised her mother to come in for a dress fitting. When all her friends fell asleep in their hotel rooms after the wild night, the woman got on the road. And even though Iris was sober, she was extremely tired. And thus, her red car ended up in a ditch in the middle of the forest. The woman woke up from a cold touch on her head. Having opened her eyes, Iris felt she was lying on the grass and saw a stranger in front of her wiping blood off her face with a wet handkerchief. Before Iris had time to say anything, the man whispered, "It's okay. Don't try to talk. You're safe. It's all behind you now. My name's Matthew. I'm the local forester. I pulled you out of the car." Iris was just about to ask the stranger something when there was a massive explosion. The woman was terrified when she looked at the fire and smoke, which swirled in a black cloud in the place of her car. "Huh. Luckily we made it out on time," the man said. "Well, let's go to my house. We need to treat the wound on your forehead or you'll get a huge bump." Iris didn't protest. She was in a state of shock, so she got into the stranger's car and sat silently in the back seat. The woman shuddered when Matthew stopped on their way and led a huge wolf into his car. The predator took his place by the man. "This is Duke, my friend. Don't be afraid," Matthew said with a smile, driving into his yard. My name's Iris. Thank you for saving my life," the woman said timidly. The bump on her head was getting bloodier and was very painful. The country house smelled of fresh wood and warmth. Matthew made tea and started tending to the guest's wound. He cleaned the abrasions and applied an ointment. Meanwhile, the woman looked at the forester's house with interest. She felt very comfortable there. Do you have a phone? Iris suddenly asked, getting agitated. I need to call my parents, and my phone was in the car. Yes, of course, Matthew replied. We're modern people here in the village. The woman smiled and dialed her father's number. She told him about what had happened and asked him to pick her up, giving him the coordinates of her location. All day long, the young people drank tea and talked. There was obvious chemistry between them. It seemed as if they had known each other for all their lives. They started looking at each other in a special way, with tenderness, with incomprehensible longing, with love. When their hands touched accidentally, they froze and looked at each other. And only the gray wolf broke the silence with joyful whining. Tell me about yourself, Iris asked timidly, covering the blush on her cheeks with her hands. Where did you get such an unusual friend? I never imagined that I would come face to face with a predator one day, but he's behaving just like a dog. So cute, playful, and not at all aggressive. The man patted Duke behind the ear and began his story. I was raised by my grandfather since my parents died when I was 3 years old. Ever since I was little, I've lived in the countryside. My grandfather worked as a forester and went on rounds of the forest every day, taking care of the territory entrusted to him. He often brought me along. I remember how an entire world opened up in front of me in a forest grove. There was a secret under every bush and a surprise behind every tree. My grandfather taught me a lot. He died when I was 21 years old, and after his death, I decided to return to the village and follow his path. I've always considered this a dream job because I've long fallen in love with local nature and its inhabitants. True freedom and solitude can only be obtained in places where humans rarely set foot. One day, as I was doing my rounds, I heard an animal whining. Having come closer, I saw a wolf pup near his mother's lifeless body. The she-wolf had been shot. My heart couldn't take it. I hate people who kill animals just for fun. I looked at the defenseless wolf pup and picked him up. The pup buried its wet nose in my jacket, curling up into a ball. That's how we ended up in my house. Fortunately, my grandfather's house was located a bit away from everyone else in the village, so the neighbors didn't care what was happening there. Duke settled in, fattened up, and behaved just like an ordinary dog. Ever since then, we've always been together, and every time I go into the forest, the wolf comes with me. Now, you may not believe it, but thanks to his instincts, I managed to save you. Early that morning, we took my car to one of the more remote areas of the forest. Having parked near the bridge, we continued on foot. I immediately smelled something burning, and my loyal friend quickly determined the direction the smell was coming from. Duke became noticeably nervous. He started rushing forward, so I followed him. After about 20 minutes of fast walking, we reached one of the roads, and I was speechless. There was an overturned car in the ditch. Well, you know the rest. Thick smoke was coming from under the hood of the car, and I realized that the flame could break out, so I quickly unfastened your seatbelt and dragged you to a safe place. Fortunately, you were alive, and now you're in my house with my wolf and me. Maybe that's fate. Matthew had just finished his story when someone knocked on the door. Iris's father came to get his daughter. The man thanked the forester, offering him a handful of bills, but Matthew flatly refused to take his money. He felt very sad letting Iris go. Having returned home, the woman couldn't find a place for herself. She missed Matthew and his gray friend. Iris realized that she had fallen in love, which captivated her mind and heart. But what about my fiancé and the wedding? My parents and relatives are so looking forward to it. I can't let them down. The woman tormented herself with doubts. Matthew also knew that Iris was getting married. However, she did mention that she didn't love her fiancé. The man couldn't come up with anything better than to go looking for Iris and do what he could to stop her from getting married. Matthew jumped in his car, taking Duke with him, and drove into town. Meanwhile, everything was ready for the ceremony. The guests took their seats in the park by the lake and were eagerly waiting for the wedding ceremony to start. The man and the wolf kept driving down the unfamiliar city streets, hoping to see at least some clue that could lead them to Iris. Now, at first glance, it seemed like a very unrealistic plan, like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, as hard as it may be to believe, Duke turned out to have excellent instincts. Driving past the park, the wolf started barking loudly and scratching at the car's side window. Matthew stopped abruptly and opened the door. He ran after Duke, who rushed with all his might towards the lake, and he stopped only when he saw the wedding ceremony. "Iris, stop! Don't do it!" The man's scream came like a bolt from the blue. "I'm in love with you! Do you hear me?" All the guests were dumbfounded. They were both surprised and terrified. A wild wolf just ran up to the bride and started licking her hands and wagging his tail. The woman was crying with happiness. A couple more minutes and she would have betrayed herself by getting married to someone she didn't love. "I'm sorry, Mom, Dad. I'm sorry, Dustin, and our guests. My heart belongs to Matthew and his gray friend. As you can see, they just saved me for the second time." The woman addressed the guests, saying, "I'm sure there's going to be a wedding after all, but that will be another story." Iris took Matthew's hand, and they left the ceremony together with their faithful friend. Ever since then, a new life has begun for the couple, and their love story is still being rumored around the town.